Life went on, and I did not know how long one could endure those extreme restrictions. In the meantime, Reg was undergoing a series of medical tests, and it was not promising. Due to his once-upon-a-time habit of heavy smoking, he had developed complications with his breathing, and although he had given up the habit, he needed urgent medical attention. The latest tests also showed he had developed a severe case of prostate cancer, and the only chance of survival was an operation. Every passing day was taking him to a disastrous end, but he insisted that he did not want to have that operation. Besides, he had been advised to lose a lot of weight first, for he was extremely obese. He exclaimed he did not want to lose his manhood functions, although the specialists warned him that his cancer was fast advancing. He was not convinced about the severity of his health condition, but said he wanted to go anyway. He could not be told anything contrary to his decision, and preferred to stick to his guns. He declared he was an old-fashioned Yorkshireman, and would not move an inch. We kept meeting from time to time over a meal at the local pub, or in the city. I can never forget how a member of a group of youths walking towards our direction in the crowded Swanston Walk put his fist right in the middle of his big belly. He nearly passed out, and was in pain, insisting that when we go to the pub for a pint of Victoria Bitter, he would be all right. Soon the ugly memory of that incident was forgotten. It was an assault needing to be dealt with by the police, but he did not want to do anything about it. On the other hand, whenever we met Edita at his place, and he was feeling really down, she grabbed his hands and told him things can only get better. He really appreciated that, and told me nobody ever showed any interest and care until now, and was very surprised. Maybe he started to see that people belonging to other races could be all right too. As time went by, the situation with Edita became more and more clinical. I will say that it was due to my preference of remaining as friends, and not taking it any further. However, in reality I felt that I was not treated fairly, and was considered an ignoramus. All her friends inviting us to their places for a friendly get-together supported her idea of us getting a little more serious about our supposed relationship. There was no development other than just remaining friends. I had my own dignity and feelings. Some of her friends spoke to me discreetly about her unusual characteristics. For example, she would go with anybody, whether that person was her gardener, the postman, pizza delivery man, or somebody whom she met on the train. I could not be certain, and therefore I shall not judge her. However, seeing her sitting in the train in front of a well-presented gentleman, and making comments about how wonderfully he was dressed, pointedly asking whether he was married or had a family, was indeed very unusual. Maybe it was a Philippine tradition. Maybe it was a unique characteristic of Edita, or she was simply overly friendly with everybody. Indeed, how we met in the first place was also worth considering. With these pointers, I found it very difficult to commit myself to any serious engagement, therefore preferred not to make any comments, deciding to remain neutrally friendly. When we met at her friends' houses for a friendly chat and karaoke singing, I might have surprised a few people when I started singing their traditional songs such as Dahil Sayo, Because of You, which was made famous by Imelda Marcos all around the world. There were some other ladies from the same part of the world who were very keenly interested to have their fortunes told. It once again needed to be explained that I could not profess to tell fortunes and future love affairs of people. I could only listen, psychoanalyze people, and conclude with an observation of their actions in theoretic terms. It was almost like using the language of mathematics. Indeed, I still heard the voice of my childhood friend, whom some considered as my alleged guardian angel. What if what I have known to be my closest friend was just another aspect of me? In reality, we all need to acknowledge that there are so many unknowns and unexplainable phenomena in the world and vast universe. Although I am unable to promote the existence of a personalized supreme being, like world religions declare, I cannot deny the possibility of other existences elsewhere. My childhood friend, however, always remains real to me, and others may call that consciousness angelic if they wish to do so. I shall not stop them, but whenever I needed to discover about where to get any particular information, I have been able to obtain it from this source I call my childhood friend, and he always made certain things available to me when I needed them. Almost every time an inquiry was presented, I have been able to obtain the most logical answers from that unique source. This unseen friend has always been very real to me. When lost somewhere I was unfamiliar with, my friend often showed me where to go, saving me from possible danger. That is something I will never deny, and I know that I am a normally functioning individual. And this great friend was not born through my colorful imagination. However, superstitious Jehovah's Witnesses would probably consider it as demonic possession from one's childhood. Just maybe, what I considered and identified with was no other than a complete natural occurrence within the universe which we think we know about, but are far removed from knowing. When others questioned me about their affairs, and I had no particular answers, this friend came up with a unique wisdom, which surprised the questioners immensely. I also knew whatever was conveyed through me has helped many with their traumas. As I have indicated before, it can be more acceptable if I told you that it was perhaps some other aspect of my person, which I yet needed to discover, but, for now, I was satisfied with what I knew. Once upon a time, as my ex-wife would also remember, even before the publication of certain subjects in the magazines she was keen to read and study, I have named them along with the date of the articles to be printed long beforehand. She often questioned me how I knew, and when the subject I spoke about was published, she used to tell me I must have been inspired of God. All I knew was simply logical consideration and deduction of what could be the next subject. However, my childhood friend's prophecies were more precise. Obviously, I could never tell Magda how I knew certain things, because even then I did not desire to be accused of being involved in evil deeds. Edita and many of her friends, however, regarded me as a good psychic, yet none would ever consider the existence of cold reading. I would be happier if they had used the terminology sixth sense. It applies to all humans because we all have abilities words cannot describe. When I removed my speakers from the lounge, leaving only my comfortable chairs there, Edita exclaimed that the place looked more like a lounge room now, and she was very happy. Apparently, having me in her place made it feel like a home, but I never felt home from day one when I first entered there. I never felt at home without my music. Just a deadly silence, only occasionally hearing what Edita chose. My cooking was also not welcome, for it was not traditional Philippine food. She loved cooking a variety of traditional cuisine, and her favorite dish was a certain dried fish from her homeland. But whenever she cooked it, the fumes which permeated the entire house were far from appetizing. I tried to get used to it, for I had no other choice. Even today, thinking about it makes me feel very ill. Being a very well-educated woman, as she claimed, one was expected to trust her knowledge. Maybe I should take it all with a pinch of salt. One day she said, according to what her mother taught her, one must never put one's hands in water after sweating all day long. Remember, her mother was not educated, but worked as a pig farmer in her little village. Edita had the habit of never washing her hands before preparing food after she came home from work. I made mention of the situation, and all I got from her was that they all followed the advice of her mother never to wet their hands after work, even when the food had to be prepared. She often used the cooked rice she prepared some days before and kept in the fridge. She told me over and over again that Westerners never knew how to cook properly. Probably she was thinking of me as also being one of those Westerners, not being able to cook properly like the majority of men has popularly believed. But for many originating from their country, Americans were close to being perfect with their cuisine. In fact, since the introduction of American English into their society, everybody attempted to speak the apparently more perfect form of English like Americans. Many of them speak a mixture of their native dialects as well as Tagalog and American. Edita had the habit of complaining how lazy Australian English sounded, and her knowledge of American, as they learnt at school, was far superior. Although her friends could understand my mildly accented speech, she had some reservations about me. She did not realize that I spoke several other languages until people of different lingual backgrounds approached me. Although she told me she found me a very interesting and lovable person, she presented a persona wherein she did not regard me as supreme in education and intelligence like her. Finally, this was so reminiscent of my experiences with Magda for many years. Edita claimed that her educational background was above that of all her friends, and certainly above mine. Allegedly, their educational standards were also more advanced than the Australian, similar to American, if not the same. In other words, she did not consider getting to know me better as important. Whatever she theorized about me had to be right, and because of this, I did not attempt to tell her more about myself, knowing I would not be listened to. What was I supposedly meant to learn from this experience? The more her friends showed interest in my educational background, the more she wanted to know about me, yet she persisted in introducing me to her associates as some form of fortune-teller, and her friends, the majority of whom came from superstitious origins, kept bombarding me at every opportunity with questions about their future with this or that man. It seemed that I needed to play a role suitable for the occasion, while trying to teach them what I was really about, but I was obviously wasting my time. I remember how keen she was for me, the complete ignoramus, not to touch her MS-DOS-based computer, which only her son could play with. She must have had a very sad experience before. However, I would never touch anything that belonged to somebody else, unless it was purposely put there, Despite all that, when there was need to design an Australia Post emblem, I created one on her computer just to surprise her. She was furious about me touching her computer instead of her son, who was not home at the time, and was left in the open. I told her what I had designed to assist her with what she had promised to do, but had no idea where to start. She appeared to calm down, saying she needed to make it look a little taller. Indeed, it is the emblem Australia Post uses today. I only wanted to help her, but at the same time show her that I was not completely ignorant about using a computer. She eventually put her precious computer away, and I did not see it ever again. However, Robert occasionally played with it in his mother's bedroom. I had the feeling that she often thought her 10-year-old son was more intelligent than me. Even when she said nothing, one could sense it. I suppose being just a man, a European, and allegedly not being educated as she was, made the difference. Probably I was only expected to satisfy her needs and wants without being myself, and without considering my own interests. My understanding was that in her traditional background, men were considered only as bread earners, working hard but having no particular interests of the intellectual kind, unless they were studying engineering. This was quite reminiscent of my ex-wife's viewpoints. As time went by, Edita's attitude towards me started to change drastically for the worse, although she convinced herself as well as her friends that her alleged relationship with me was serious. Consequently, they all believed that we were lovers. Although I tried to keep quiet about it when talking to her friends, I tried to explain the reality of things, but they chose never to listen to reason, and were all convinced that one day we were going to become husband and wife. I certainly did not contemplate anything of that nature or any close relationship. They were all very happy, persuaded that she had now finally found her true love. They even spoke about Robert probably being my son from a secret love affair with her previously, for apparently the boy looked more and more like me, but none of their assumptions were correct. I remained friendly with everybody and considered all as my friends. In fact, if my own circumstances were better and I was not hindered with my personal growth in establishing a business, I would probably consider remarrying at some stage. If Edita was more accepting and respectful of my efforts and academic achievements, I could consider living with her in a close relationship. But what I had observed until then helped me with my decisions right in the beginning of our alleged friendship. Having previously told me that I could continue to paint in her house, after moving in, she firmly expressed that her house was not a factory, and certainly not a studio. I deeply regretted leaving my studio in St. Kilda. It was a huge mistake on my part. Obviously, my life was once again thoroughly confused, although I had taken her at her word and initially believed that this new venture would start something new. Almost all my endeavors remained a dream, and nothing more. In the neighborhood, one day a lovely young lady approached me, speaking in a very friendly way, and asked me if I was Birgit's father. Apprehensively at first, I explained that I was now trying to make my life a little more organized, not wanting to be recognized because of my fears due to previous experiences, and yes, I was her father, whom they had all rejected and abandoned. She said she knew it was because of the religion they followed. Almost every morning thereafter she greeted me with a very friendly smile. That always reminded me of once having a family I loved dearly, but where were they now? A man-made and certainly myth-based religion had twisted their minds, and those of their associates bent with the belief that theirs was the only truth, helped destroy my family in the name of so-called spiritual love. Anything that reminded me of my once-upon-a-dream hurt me more. Native Australian Harold Blair's wife lived nearby, and we were great neighbors. We used to visit her and talk about his singing career, which came to an abrupt end when he unexpectedly passed on. Through his singing beautiful operatic arias and other performances, he certainly made Australian music lovers proud. Occasionally meeting Australian native people was very refreshing. Edita used to talk about turning her home into a Japanese-looking place when things were favorable. But as the boys' educational expenses increased, and whatever her personal needs were, she decided to sell her framed palette knife paintings from the Philippines, depicting hard-working peasants' life and village fishermen. She loved talking about her so-called unique and prize-winning car, a Ford Telstra she called Seb, C-E-B. That was part of the registration characters as seen on her plate. It needed urgent repair after a bad accident when I was her passenger. Another vehicle speeding on the wrong side of the road collided with her car, which spun around and was miraculously parked in front of traffic lights on the opposite side. We were physically shocked, and I was not too happy with my emotions for a while. After medical testing in a hospital, we were declared all right. She said that this was not the first time that had happened to her, because the roads were occupied by many silly idiots. I discovered that whenever she was out of her bounds, she clearly had an impaired attention on the roads, but the fault always had to be somebody else's. Another time, traversing in very heavy traffic, an agitated driver behind her was throwing out a few ungainly words angrily because of Edita being a little too slow. But seated in the front, I could see that she was unable to move any faster. Finally, the other driver pushed himself forward in front of the red lights, but there were a few more cars before him. As he stood next to us, he raised his voice again, shouting that bloody bitch should learn to drive first, even calling me with abusive names, which I completely ignored, but looked into his eyes directly, sending out a mental image he could not comprehend. He was like a raging bull. However, I would not lower myself to his level. I told Edita that he was now going to cause an accident and hurt himself, but I am not sure if she believed in anything I said. As soon as I finished my words, the lights turned green, and traffic started to move, ever so slowly, but the driver in the car next to us kept swearing and accelerated so hard that he rammed into a utility truck just in front of him. The front of his car was under the truck. His window smashed, and he was bleeding from his forehead, although not badly hurt. I told Edita that we should leave the scene before the police arrived. Hopefully, a lesson had been learnt. Road rage does not pay. She asked me over and over, "How did you know? You must be really psychic." I could not fathom what the psychic was about, as it was obvious. Months later, she still asked me how I knew what that other driver was going to experience. It seemed I had to present a personality others imagined me being, and not who I truly was. Whenever her Filipino friends visited her, she presented herself in a more positive and happier note, and was animated. She suddenly had a lot of food at home and felt immensely proud, preparing all kinds of delicacies in a very traditional style. There were no other Australians or Europeans amongst them other than me, and they spoke happily in their mother dialects, including Tagalog. In truth, I personally felt a little lost until some attempted to talk to me in Filipino-American with an Australian twist. That was when they wanted me to tell them their fortunes. One of her friends was a very kindly gentleman, known to be gay, and unfortunately, having developed AIDS-related complications, he passed on at a young age. When visiting his sister after the funeral, I drew his image, as I remembered him, and gave it to her, and she was highly delighted. This surprised a number of them regarding my skills, and made Edita feel very proud of being associated with me. At times, we visited her male friend from Mauritius and his Filipino wife. He was extremely happy to be able to speak his native tongue, French, with me. There I discovered that Edita was the original matchmaker before their happy marriage. He used to call Edita with words like mon amour, meaning my love. Edita told me that although she introduced her friend to him, he seemed to be more interested in her, and she was not very comfortable with it. He often asked me in French about how I was coping with her friends only speaking in their language, leaving one all alone and feeling lost. I told him that they offer food to their menfolk to occupy them so that they can continue conversing with each other all about their personal issues and gossip. He used to agree and laugh with me. However, our speaking only in French did not appeal to the ladies, as they were feeling isolated and, in a sense, bored. I suggested that it would be far better if we shared our conversations so that no one would feel sidetracked or ignored. But they continued conversing in their tongue as before. This gentleman loved his coffee strong by burning it slightly before adding water. That was his taste. He also considered Edita's son somewhat inclining towards being gay. Her friend Cherry and her children were always happy, but she suspected her husband of playing around with other ladies. Her parents lived in the States and were wealthy, assisting their daughter and grandchildren. One day she asked me to draw a family portrait of them, also include her father in the picture. I made copies, and Cherry sent the original to her father in the States. They were apparently very thrilled. Cherry later went back to the Philippines to have her eyelids corrected to look more like Westerners. It was her decision, but I personally prefer people to accept themselves as they are. However, that procedure obviously made her feel happy. Her little daughter was tiny, but very clever and a very happy giggler. Her young son resembled his father. The family lived not far from Glen Waverley, in a beautiful home. Cherry also loved cooking. She and Edita were well matched in creative cuisine. On many occasions we had karaoke sessions, singing together with their other friends. This trend had become quite traditional amongst the Filipinos. I even attempted to sing their traditional songs, other than what I have already told you, and also tried to improve my Tagalog language skills. Edita's friends were very surprised, but she was indifferent, making me feel as if she did not much care. Everybody talked about how Robert resembled me, asking me discreetly if I had known Edita before, without Gus, her ex-husband, being aware of it. No, was my answer, jokingly adding, it could have been an immaculate conception. This made them laugh, but in reality, when looking at the boy's features, I could see more likeness to the Mauritius friend of hers than either me or Gus. After seeing my images in Edita's collection of photographs, some of her friends visiting Chelsea Heights had been making comments like, "Those gorgeous legs he has got are lost in a man. They are female legs." Were they perhaps sarcastic or joking? That in itself was not nice. My legs are hairy, very muscular and bulky, as they were then. Those same friends even suggested that I was probably also gay. I thought they were trying to encourage me to show them what I was truly interested in, but I was going to let them dream on. When someone is very friendly with everyone, it is immediately labeled as society sees fit, or as certain groups of people prefer to consider. If I had married Edita, would they consider me as gay? I wondered. Bearing in mind what I had experienced with my marital dreams or nightmares, and having had no chance to properly recover, remarriage was unthinkable. I preferred real friendships and camaraderie. The word marriage started to scare me. Besides, I did not know Edita well, and there were too many differences between us. We were in many ways like chalk and cheese. I believe she was telling them a few things in this regard, and I was not meant to know. I was hurt before, and was not interested in being hurt again, or hurting somebody else. Her entry into my life was totally unwarranted. As I mentioned before, Edita kept cooking a type of dried fish, and the unfortunate smells filling the place was unbearable. Those fishy aromas remained on one's clothing for a long while, yet the smell of paint and turps was not acceptable to her. I felt she also traditionally needed to trim me to her liking. There were times she felt we should go and see a religious person, a priest, visiting Australia. He belonged to a certain Christian order and was apparently extremely spiritual, conducting exorcisms, and it was obvious that Edita had seen him before. When visiting him in one of the western suburbs, he had volunteer servants to help him, and we were cordially welcomed. At the time there was another couple seated opposite me, towards the left, by the window, in a largish lounge room, and, as the religious gentleman discreetly told me, the woman seated by the window was possessed by a few evil spirits, and they already had several sessions with her. When she saw me, she shouted, saying it was nice to see me again, after all those passing decades. She was laughing and very happy. But I do not remember seeing her before. Suddenly she started to raise her voice once again, this time asking me why I was there, and why I was apparently hurting her again. She started to yell even louder, in English and Tagalog respectively. "I hate you! I hate you! Get away from me! I will kill you!" If she had a German accent, I would think of her being the reincarnation of Magda. Psychologically, she was suffering from multiple personality complexes. But I was going to say nothing. Hopefully, the exorcism she was subjected to could help her. The spiritual gentleman entered the room and began reciting a few Christian prayers, sprinkling her with holy water. At first she shouted, "Stop it! It's hurting me!" But shortly after, she was reasonably calmed. She greeted me again, this time with a friendly "hello," but as they got up to leave, shouted, "I don't want to see this man ever. He is against my Lord." Was she talking about the Lord Jesus, or the other one the witnesses feared? After this amusing encounter, we were offered a small prayer session, tea and snacks. The young priest then told Edita that he could see a good fortune with her real friend, and she should be more open to him, and remain faithful. There will be a good fortune if you two stay together. You should never break the bond. But was there any bond in the first place? She was extraordinarily excited, especially when he described me to Edita as a very holy man. He also made mention of her son, Robert, looking like me, and many of her friends kept declaring the same. They were still asking her if the boy really was from Gus, or was he from Suren. She might have hoped that I had impregnated her remotely from another dimension and another world. She also claimed that the boy's eyes, black hair, and even nose did not look like hers or Gus's. He looked like his pop's for sure. She kept insisting that I give her the large portrait of the young lad who made appearances in my Perth studio, but I was certainly not going to part with it. She still claimed it to be so very unusual to paint her son's portrait, even before meeting them in Melbourne, and it was definitely her son's image. I was glad to have subsequently drawn Robert's actual portrait with every detail and realism to give it to her as a gift. It looked lifelike and was expressive. Other people and all her friends discovered the reality of my work being so much like Robert when he was about 10 and a half. And I created that work in 1991. But Edita was extremely adamant in her resolve, demanding to have the portrait which was not Robert's. Again, I made it clear that I was not going to part with it. She said, "In that case, maybe you can include it in your will, so that when you are gone, that portrait, you can leave it to me." To a dream. I am just a thought away, and we are one. I am there, rejoicing in your laughter. Wherever you are, I am there, in your smiles, your cries, your sighs. Wherever you are, my image in your eyes, in the beauty of light, thoughts floating by, a memory, a moment in time, an illusion it seems. I am a thought, apart or together, you and I, separated or in love. I am there, in your dreams, smiling with you, with every thought you think, together, and the same, united as one. I am there, in your joys, your sighs, a dream, a memory, in all your imaginings. I am a thought, in the clouds, the distant hillside, the great ocean, and the sun, a silent call, in a prayer. I am everywhere with you forever, for we are one and all.